Well, good evening, everyone. It's so exciting to be here together tonight. My name is Julie White, and I'm from Pennsylvania, and I'm super excited to introduce a very dear friend to you all tonight, Jacqueline Sheppard. She is amazing. She's a counselor, an educator, a mother, and a grandmother, and really a wonderful mother and grandmother. She is the founder of a private high school, a former journalist, and with her husband Glenn, the co-founder of International Prayer Ministries. And for over 50 years, Jacqueline's extensive experience in counseling, research, and teaching concerning the body and brain have transformed many lives. And she is also an author of an amazing book called Silent Takeover. And she is also working on another book, which I believe is going to be about our topic tonight, ADHD and autism. So I'm really excited to have you here tonight. It's going to be a great time of learning together. She's a wealth of information, has so much experience in this field with many children and adults. And so, Jackie, we just love and appreciate you so much. It's always just such a great honor to have you share with us. So I'm just going to turn the time over to you, dear friend.
Thank you, Julie. I I'm always excited when I get to teach about ADD, ADHD, and autism. And Julie's right. I'm trying to finish a book on it. The problem is I keep getting distracted, and one of those reasons is because I research every morning. I'm often finding new data, and it becomes a rabbit trail so often for me. But what you're actually going to be seeing tonight is sort of the basic outline I'm working on for my book on ADD, ADHD, and autism. So I have to know that if I share all this information with you, you're still going to buy my book. I hope I can depend on you all to do that. um, the I continue to hear from you all and people that you give silent takeover how the body hijacks the mind too. Which for those of you who are new with us tonight, it is on mental, emotional, and addictive disorders. So it's chock full of footnotes, and I have an idea that this new book I'm working on is going to have even more footnotes. So we're going to jump in because I want time at the end for you to be able to ask questions. Okay? Now, Carol was kind enough to help me with a little bit of a slide program tonight. I'm hoping you can see it, Julie. Is that true? Good, good. You'll notice that in my introduction, this is to my book as well as to you tonight. The brief history is simply the overview that they noticed way back, more than the 60 years that I've been in research, that there were certain children that seemed not just inattentive, but also could not retain information. But these children were so rare at the time. I remember the exact moment in my life when I heard the word ADHD the first time. And it was actually about 1970, maybe 72. I remember the moment, it was either 71 or 72, so it was quite early. They were just beginning to throw some of these labels around, and people were trying to, especially in the education world, they were trying to understand what was happening. I'd started teaching in 1962. For those of you who are wondering, is that lady that old? I am. And we watched the changes in the classroom. I was already linking something is wrong in their body that affects their mind when I was introduced to a research pediatrician in Atlanta, Georgia, who asked me what did I think about the new diagnoses, ADD, ADHD, and autism. He knew I was a teacher, and I responded, I think there's something wrong in their body that's affecting their mind. I just don't know what it is. And he was examining my son, and he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "That's what I think. Will you help me?" And I said, "What can I do?" And he said, "You have students. I want to do all sorts of metabolic testing on them to see if we can find links." So this was in the early 80s. Now, for some of you, when you're doing research, you're going to run across that they began to track this in the early 80s. So yeah, we were right there at the very beginning of this, and I'm still on the same page. Conclusively, there is something wrong in their bodies that affects their mind. So tonight, we're going to be talking a little bit about that. So my journey actually started a long time ago, and it continues every day. I still meet with parents from time to time whose children have these disorders. And so often, when I'm trying to explain the journey, the path we have to get them on, it's hard to get them to realize that there's not a pill that's truly going to help these kids. If those of you have had them on Ritalin, Adderall, all sorts of things, you know the problems with all of those. For me, with my private high school that I started in 1988, I quickly saw that those drugs became doorway drugs to kids having burned out adrenal glands by the time I got them 16, 17, 18, from having been on amphetamines for so many years. They were desperate. And when you're not, when your body is not supplying enough adrenaline, the brain begins to message to the other brain, the auto brain messages to the conscious brain, "I have to have some more adrenaline, so you need to take some risk, or you need to," that drugs will be very enticing to these kids, as well as alcohol, especially pornography, because of the huge boost of dopamine they get, and just as well as the more violent the video game, the more thrill they'll get from it. So this, you can see the results of this quite often on the evening news, unfortunately. So let's jump in here, because the question that I am most often asked, and that I have been asked through these years, is what causes ADD, ADHD, and autism? So I answered it in this very first line. I am convinced, not just because of my research and international data that I follow and read, I am convinced because of my own experiences with young people, with adults, that it is neuroinflammation in the brain that interferes with brain signaling. So you're like, what is that? Well, you understand inflammation in the lungs, you understand inflammation in the liver, you understand inflammation in the gut, you understand inflammation in your foot, in your leg. Inflammation in the brain is not that easy to see. Uh, Even though there will most likely be some swelling, you can't look at somebody's head unless there's a major injury and see it. But inflammation is just the accumulation of things that are not supposed to be there that are causing reactions in the brain. So, what do I think is number one? I'm going to say that environmental toxins in the womb and in the developing child contribute greatly to neuroinflammation. Now, what am I talking about? We are faced with more processed foods, herbicides, pesticides, toxic chemicals, Roundup, and all sorts of chemicals in our food chain than our bodies were created to handle. When these things go into your body doesn't know what to do with them. If you eat an apple, if that apple resembles a real apple, that it's not so GMO and covered with herbicides or pesticides, your body will put it in its little matrix and it will say, "Oh, I know what to do with this." It will digest it, and then it will begin to send the nutrients from that apple throughout the body to be used. However, the herbicide, anything that's on that apple or in that apple that the body cannot recognize, it cannot use. The body has to use whatever you eat, or it has to excrete it, or sweat it out, or throw it up. It needs to get rid of it. But if it cannot use it and it cannot excrete it, it has to store it. And with many, many children and many, many adults, these toxins are stored in the brain. So we have a lovely young pregnant woman, and perhaps the sperm from the father has come from a toxic male anatomy. And what I'm saying that is that we know now so many things pass through the sperm that we didn't know 40, 50 years ago that things could go through the sperm. In my book, Silent Takeover, I footnote where they can find hairspray in the womb. So certainly there are toxins, environmental toxins, and so forth that are transferred to the very um, at conception that may carry toxins. But in the mother, it doesn't mean just let's say has she been using drugs? Has she been using alcohol? Of course, this endangers her developing baby. But if she has high toxins in her body, high environmental toxins, that baby is actually growing in a toxic womb. It's full of toxins the baby's body is not equipped to handle. One of the quotes I'll be using in my book concerns how many pesticides that they find just in the cord when they have examined the cord that links the mother to the child. They have found, and I actually can't remember the number right now, so many toxic chemicals. So this little baby is being conceived in a very, very toxic womb. The mother, if the mother has high oxidative stress from these toxins, and most likely she does, especially the older she gets, that baby will make too much of an enzyme called superoxide dismutase. And that will affect the chromosome that defines Down syndrome. So it's not just ADD, ADHD, and autism. It's other mitochondrial and developmental defects that little baby's body can encounter. So by the time the baby is born, some of these toxins, especially in the first few months, will be in the baby's brain. So, how do we avoid them? Um, I think at all cost, a mother carrying a baby should avoid processed foods. And you're like, what? Because we all tend to eat out too much, don't we? We run through a drive-through. We stop and grab something. We pick up something at the grocery store because our lives are so busy, and that even that busyness and emotional stress contributes to toxins in the womb. Herbicides. That's why, if you can possibly afford it, cut back on other things in the grocery store. Try to buy organic so that you will have less, and I'm saying less, toxic residues from herbicides and pesticides. Then there'll be a whole chapter on toxic chemicals that are used in manufacturing that they're finding in these children and actually in their very clothing production. Some of you have read about the flame retardant chemicals that for many years went in practically every child's clothing in case they caught on fire. Then the clothing wouldn't burn as easily. And yet found out later that these toxic chemicals were very dangerous for the brain and contribute to ADD, ADHD, and autism. If you have any Roundup, any glyphosate on your premises, I want to recommend you get rid of it regardless of whether or not you have a child, a baby around, or even your pets, because men, there is conclusive evidence that this contributes to prostate cancer. In fact, in these 15 years, I've talked to who knows how many men with prostate cancer. I have never found one of them that had not had some exposure to Roundup, either in their own yards, in their business, and one was like 15 or 20 years earlier when he worked with, I think it was in college in landscaping. Glyphosate is definitely a link to environmental toxins that cause neuroinflammation, not just in the other cells of the body, but especially in the brain. And then the reason I put here imbalance in omega-6 and omega-3, we'll talk a little bit more about that, is because part of the reason that these chemicals can so go into the cells is that every little cell has a little fatty membrane. If that little fatty membrane is composed of really good rock solid omega-3, it can't find its way in as well. But because our processed foods, in a way, a lot of the way we eat at our house involves so much omega-6, then that little lipid membrane around that little cell will be jagged. And it's not just viruses and bacteria and everything that can go into it. Uh, it's also these toxic chemicals, and then especially the foods, the chemicals used in food production. Some of you have heard me say, if you can't pronounce the word when you're reading the ingredients, if you can't pronounce the word, neither can your body. Your body is not designed for this. A child's developing brain are not designed for these things. So let's go on. Did I skip one here? Or are my numbers off? No. Okay, now you've been hearing the controversy, and you may have heard me speak a few weeks ago about acetaminophen. I was talking to a lady in the grocery store, and she made the comment to me, isn't that ridiculous that they think acetaminophen can cause autism? And I said, actually, the science is there. If you watched that program this morning, I think it's recorded. I had a manuscript about this thick from 2013, I think it was, or 12, which was the first that I had read about the enormous links. In there, if you look at the graph from down here when we had very little ADD, ADHD, and autism, to where it just began to go up, down here, when a baby had a fever, we gave the child baby aspirin. But then the media came out with all of this information about how harmful baby aspirin could be, with giving them Raynaud's syndrome. And everybody got afraid. And then they also said, don't worry, because there is a new product coming out that will do a better job than baby aspirin on lowering temperatures and inflammation. And of course, that turned out to be Tylenol. And because it was cherry liquid, who knew how dangerous it was? And we've given gallons of acetaminophen to these children, not understanding. So when I go to the first one here, vaccines, this is not a political statement. Nothing that you hear or see about a childhood disease should be political. Why would I link vaccines to ADD, ADHD, and autism? Because the facts are there. But let me explain to you why. Acetaminophen shuts down your body's master antioxidant enzyme. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And it shuts it down. It depletes it for 4 to 6 hours. Now, the job of this particular antioxidant enzyme is to clean out toxins. Well, now with a vaccine, let's say you're giving just a plain old vaccine for measles. There's all sorts of other things that go in the vaccine, preservatives, all sorts of things. I'm going to have a whole chapter about this that are included in that shot. So it is not really the measles vaccine itself, it's all the other things in the shot that goes into this baby. And I think I read recently that babies before they're 9 months old get 22 shots. Now, guys, even in a world of some little bit of common sense, that doesn't make sense. So, little bit of measles can give the baby a fever. The pediatrician says to the mother, if the baby gets fretful, give the baby Tylenol or give the baby acetaminophen. I don't want to just pick on Tylenol because there are many acetaminophenes out there. Um, the mother gives the baby the one thing, that this enzyme is shut down, that enzyme is the one thing that could clear out these toxins. So, baby falls asleep, maybe the fever goes down, but that neuroinflammation is in their brain from the toxins. We give acetaminophenes for so many childhood illnesses. Now, if you want to do your own research, go to any drugstore, any grocery store, and you read the products for colds, sinuses, anything, and you're going to see that it's almost impossible to find one without acetaminophen. So we don't just use this for fretful babies with vaccines. We have been giving acetaminophen for childhood illnesses for so many years. And as you watch that chart, ADD, ADHD, and autism get higher and higher, you can see that it increased with the use of acetaminophen. Now, the other thing, which is sad, is that parents will use acetaminophen for their own convenience. What do I mean like that? The baby needs to go to sleep. I'm tired. I want to go to bed. I'm exhausted. And they will give these children acetaminophen, not having any idea that they are increasing the child's chances for ADD, ADHD, and autism. And then for pediatricians, doctors overly prescribe it. They don't just overly prescribe it to children, they overly prescribe it to adults. You think about how often you have been told to take Tylenol for something. Just think about it. You look in your medicine cabinet and see how many of the cold preparations or whatever you have in there includes the word acetaminophen. And as I mentioned, the enzyme, your master antioxidant enzyme that gets rid of the toxins in your body every day, is called glutathione. 2011, Dr. Martha Herbert, who is probably the most outstanding physician in America in this field, she's at Harvard, said that she is convinced that the low production of glutathione is the link to ADD, ADHD, and autism. I'm convinced. I had just, through my own experience, some of you have heard me tell about walking into the study saying, honey, it has to be glutathione. And he said, yes, darling, because the last thing he wanted me to do was tell him, one, what I was talking about, and second, all of the unnecessary information surrounding it. But if you have an invalid in a bed, and that invalid can only blink their eyes, if you measure the glutathione in their body, it will be hardly measurable. Glutathione is not just linked to aging, it's what gets rid of lactic acid in your muscles. So those of you who suffer with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, you're just not making enough glutathione. So it's not just ADD, ADHD, and autism or childhood diseases that suffer when that child cannot make enough glutathione. It's all of us. When we're not making enough, the body will have to let you know it one way or the other with just poor with malaise and poor health. Um, but I am convinced that one of the major causes is this low production of glutathione. And the reason I added genetic there is because genetically, geneticists have said that over half of Americans are predisposed to not making enough glutathione. So you have a mother predisposed to not making enough glutathione, a father predisposed to not making enough glutathione. They get married. That child has a greater chance of not making enough glutathione genetically. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be changed. We can change our genetics. That's the field of epigenetics. So in my book, there's going to be a whole chapter here because when these diagnoses first started coming out, they told us it was genetic. And I was like, no, if it were genetic, and the years of I'd been teaching many years by that time, I would have seen it then. We would have been seeing this. We didn't. And so therefore, it's not, does genetics play a part? Well, they do in a lot of things, but there's really not the genetic strong point that they had hoped to find. Actually, when I say hope, everybody was looking for an excuse. Medications can lower your glutathione, as well as poor nutrition. Your body is designed to make glutathione from fruits and vegetables, especially the dark colored ones. However, you're not eating the fruits and vegetables from the Garden of Eden. You're not even eating the fruits and vegetables from 30, 40 years ago. 1934, the Department of Agriculture said the soil no longer has enough nutrient value to grow fruits and vegetables with the nutrition that we need. That was a long time ago. So the foods, the fruits and vegetables that you're eating, you cannot get enough. Even if you squeeze them in little tablets, you cannot get enough to do what this wonderful enzyme is designed to do in the body. And again, low glutathione from just poor nutrition, and then adding another cause, and this is a huge cause, vitamin and mineral deficiencies. And when I say imbalanced ratios, that's on things like copper and zinc. The first studies that I was privileged to look at with Dr. Murray back in the early 80s showed that most of the children that, I think every one of them, I think, that whose parents had brought them to him to be tested, were deficient in zinc. And he said to me, no one in America should be deficient in zinc. So I'm sitting there, I just knew nothing. And I'm just sitting there fascinated with this brilliant mind. And he said, I want you to give your students 40 milligrams of zinc and tell me what happens. Well, normally you can get enough zinc from your food. But when I said that, we both said almost at the same time, but you've got to be able to absorb it. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a little while. So, um, they came back when ADHD, they're probably chewing their nails all the time. They, as we added more zinc, they quit biting their nails. They're picking at their skin, they're twisting their hair. Their body is trying to balance. Twisting hair produces a little bit of pain, and that causes sorts of things to spark. So give them copper because Dr. Ray explained that you have to have a ratio between copper and every now and we'd run into one whose copper was extremely high, and those children tended to have depression. A lot of the homes in the South had copper pipes. So nobody looked at you like, what? Um, so a lot of kids were being overexposed to copper from their drinking water and even taking a bath, washing their hair. So that ratio with vitamins and minerals in the body contributes so much to lower neuroinflammation and especially uh, brain development, getting those vitamins and minerals that the brain needs. So, one of the reasons here, one of the causes, is a lack of brain development. So, we've already talked about nutrition in the womb and in childhood. You can, common sense tells you that. Um, the other thing, though, is with children, with their baby foods, they have found so much glyphosate in them that we're actually just feeding them a little Roundup with the rest of it. Screens. In Silent Takeover, I tell you about a study. I think, Julie, it was in Philadelphia. Um, I'm sorry, in Pennsylvania, maybe in Philadelphia, where they were studying, and this was probably 30, 35 years ago. They were studying the effect of computers and television screens on a group of babies. They had to stop the test because the babies' brains were being wired incorrectly. Now, what does that mean? And this is a whole chapter in my book, because a baby is listening in the womb. A baby is supposed to listen to the mother's voice, listen to the father's voice, listen to the siblings, maybe hear the dog bark. When that baby is born, the baby locks on those sounds that it is familiar with. Same thing happens out here in my pasture. A baby goat is born, and all of the mothers can be yelling at the same time, and that baby goat knows its mother's voice because he's been hearing it or she's been hearing it. So, in the chapter that I'm writing about screens, I have to point out that these little babies in the womb with constant television, constant music, constant noise, constant just no telling where the mother's going, they cannot lock on their mother's voice. They can't lock on their father's voice. So they're born into the world already auditory confused. There's so much. I could write a whole book just on this. The next one, electromagnetic fields. If you don't think electromagnetic fields disturb brain development in a child, then research how electromagnetic fields disturb your brain development. In the elderly, people retire, they come home, they do two things. They become more and more exposed to electromagnetic fields and they watch screens. There's no activity in their brains while they're watching those screens. I've taught you before, you can use your GPS to go practically anywhere. Try to go back without it because you don't lay down brain neuron. It doesn't lay down these neuron tracks that you need to learn. So if the brain is wired incorrectly, that child cannot learn correctly. Fourth reason here on the lack of brain development is the lack of quiet. Think about it yourself. Think about the lack of quiet you have. And one reason is this right here. People get quiet. I've been observing lately that anywhere time I'm in a public place, I've had to sit in the doctor's office a lot due to my husband's surgeries that he had on his knee. And everybody in the waiting room would be on their phones. And a lot of them were listening. They had on their little earbuds so they can listen. I don't know that people have an hour of quiet a day. And so, therefore, that disturbs brain development and it disturbs brain function. That's whether or not you're a fetus in the womb or an 82-year-old. It's going to disturb your brain development and your brain activity if you do not have enough quiet. 5, one of the major reasons is a lack of connection to nature. And some of you who've heard me teach before, you know that I teach grounding, letting the child go barefoot outside, letting the child get dirty, play in the dirt. Sometimes you'll see these children eating dirt, and that's because they're so they cannot absorb the minerals from their food. because, and we'll talk about it later, their gut. So lack of connection to nature, just observing the world, the outside world around them, because most parents, and you're going to know what I'm saying is true, they hand them a phone or they hand them an iPad. So before the children can talk, they know how to use their iPad. That signals the brain that they don't have to talk. In some of the classes, and I always uh, tell them I don't approve of it, they will teach a child who is not verbal, who has autism, who are not verbal, to like point to the apple or bring up an apple on his iPad if he or she wants an apple, until that brain decides it has to talk to have its needs fulfilled. These hemispheres, language is in the left, speech is in the right, will not do this. It hasn't been taught to talk. It has an auditory processing disorder, and many of these children could be taught to talk, but not with the methods we're using. And then this one is huge, huge. Lack of connections with daily life versus virtual. They don't know the difference in these cartoon characters. They don't know the difference in all of these little things that they are given to watch. They don't know that these are virtual. And so the frustration of trying to connect in an undeveloped child's brain, what's real, what's tangible, versus the virtual world that they are being taught to live in, will lead to a lack of brain development, a lack of personality development, a lack of human development. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Is that the one I want to be on? Yeah. Another major reason is the gut-brain connection. You've heard this so much. Years and years ago, we thought that neurotransmitters, those chemicals that cause you to really think like you do, act like you do, we thought they were made in the brain. It was probably 16, maybe 20 years ago when we found out the first evidence that neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and so forth are actually made in the gut. Now, they're utilized in the brain, but they're made in the gut. So if the gut is in a mess, and I would say that I haven't yet, in all of these 60 years of working with ADD, ADHD, and most recently in the last 20 with autism, I've not met one. In fact, I'm not even sure I have counseled a person with mental, emotional, or addictive disorders who didn't also have a messed up gut. It's just that because this tissue in the gut stretches in the womb to also become the brain, you're actually looking at one thing. It's just the same tissue in different places. So if it is not made properly in the gut due to a disturbed gut, you're going to have a disturbed brain. You notice I mentioned the production of neurotransmitters, the utilization of neurotransmitters such as serotonin, dopamine, but especially glutamate. Children with ADD, ADHD, well, really more ADHD, and now they're really just using ADHD to include ADD. And then autism is being referred to as ASD, the autism spectrum disorder, which covers all sorts of mild and high functioning autism. In with those children, whenever you start working with the gut, one of the first things that I have to do is explain to the parent that if the child is being exposed to foods and other things that increase glutamate, they are going to be more hyperactive. That is the neurotransmitter. The illustration I use is that it is the one that makes you think you can take your motorcycle and jump from one cliff to the other. That's your glutamate, the gas pedal in the brain. And many of them are running on full throttle all the time. If you have worked with one, you know what I'm saying is true. But the other neurotransmitter that if these two are imbalanced, if there's high glutamate and low GABA, you're going to have a child with ADHD. You're going to have a disturbed adult. You're most likely going to have a person who is addictive because GABA is what makes you feel calm and serene and tells you, don't be stupid, you can't jump your motorcycle from one cliff to the other. That is so deficient in so many of these children. But glutamate, MSG, that's one of the foods that if you eat it, and it's in so many foods, it increases glutamate. So the whole study on what can we feed these children is actually almost another book. So anyway, enough on that. The gut needs to be corrected, and it can be. You can take metabolic testing. In fact, somewhere here, I must have left out the slide that said metabolic testing, because that's usually where I like to start, is with metabolic testing, finding out what's wrong with the cells in the body. So a gut has to be, in order to be corrected, we need to eliminate the parasites, viruses, the fungi, bacteria, and we need to add healthy and make it healthy and balanced while we are adding prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics. We have to make the gut a happy place if we're going to correct ADD, ADHD, and autism. Next, and I'm conscious we're running out of time here, a belief system. The medical establishment has been taught that this can't be changed. So they tend to tell the parents to accept it. I have met with many parents who told me again and again that their pediatrician said there's nothing can be done, just accept it and do the best you can. That never rang true with me, never rang true. I always knew there was something we can do. And secondly, the belief system in the parents. They simply doubt that anything can change. And a lot of times that's because they've used their retirement money, they've used equity in their homes, they've borrowed their parents' retirement money, they've done everything they could to help their child. Many of these marriages end up in a divorce because of the pressure of an ADHD child and certainly an autism child. So this belief system has to be changed. I think we're making some progress there. Next, let's see where I am. We have a broken education system, and I know some of you are shaking your head. Yes, that's why I started my private school back in 1988. I had been in education for many years. I'd also homeschooled due to deficiencies my own child had, who was a Beta Club member. And I saw how broken it was. So by that time, I was working through so many of these children at that time in an elementary tutorial program, teaching them how to read and how to remember what they were reading. And I thought when I was looking at education materials, I was talking with some of the teachers and all, I remember remarking, and I still say it so often today, why are we trying to teach squirrels to swim and ducks to climb trees? The system is so broken that the individual child can hardly be found in it. And with a room of 25 to 30 of these young people now who are so broken culturally and family-wise and everything, how in the world can a teacher help an individual child? And even if you have already put them in a private school, they may still be using the same methodology. So you don't really need, the education system really does not need to teach squirrels to swim, do we? We don't need ducks climbing trees. The way the brain works, some are visual learners, some are verbal learners. We have, and this is another whole thing that's not even necessary tonight. we need to enhance and balance both sides of the brain, both hemispheres. Education system adds to the problems with these young people, regardless of their good intentions, and it must be changed if we're going to end this problem. Uh, Secondly, or number 9 here, presently, no meaningful and practical corrective systems are in society, and they're not in the church. So many churches will tell the parents that they cannot handle their children if they have autism, and they will tell them not to bring them to church. Guys, that breaks my heart. This last statement here, and then I'm going to go back because I think I actually skipped one of my slides. We can overcome ASD, ADD, ADHD, autism, and dementia. And the reason I'm saying that is there's so many parallels and there's so many things that they have in common, and we need to do it now. Uh, I'm going to move to the protocol rapidly, and then we're going to stop for questions and answers. What protocol do I use and have I used for all these years? And it is something that I add to as I discover it. One, metabolic testing for every cell in the body. This used to be so difficult and really impossible, but it is now possible. And it is much easier than ever to test all of these things that are wrong in their body. Let's just use, for example, the mineral imbalances. We can test now. We can see in a chart. We can see in color-coded charts what's wrong. The second thing that I do, and quite often a parent is like, I don't want to test, but can we just help my child or an adult? I think the most effective thing is to lower oxidative stress, because when you're lowering oxidative stress, you are lowering neuroinflammation. You're lowering inflammation everywhere in the body. But quite often, this will show up rapidly, 3 weeks or just a few months, that the neuroinflammation is dropping. So I recommend that we lower oxidative stress to get rid of as many bad guys as possible as rapidly as we can. And then the balancing of omega-3 and other fatty acids, I will usually recommend some pretty high dosages of omega-3s. With adults, I usually say omega-3 and omega-7 to lower the omega-6. Adequate. Now, this is an important word here. Adequate intake of amino acids. This is from your food. You got to get the building blocks into the body to develop these brains. Do not think that chicken nuggets and French fries are going to develop a child's brain. It's not. It's going to do all sorts of bad stuff. And with most of the children, and really most of the adults right now, we have to give digestive enzymes because they're not making, their gut doesn't have enough digestive enzymes to adequately digest the food to get those amino acids to supply the gut with what it needs to make the neurotransmitters, plus thousands of other functions in the body. Number 5 here, adequate and over adequate nutrition and food groups. Now, why am I saying over adequate? Sometimes there are families that are so afraid of their child becoming fat that they hold back food, or they will let the child eat snacks instead of adequate nutrition. When we are building the brain in these children, it is better for them to have more nutrition than less. It's better for them to have healthy foods. They will stop when these things are balanced in their body. They won't overeat unless they are craving sugar. And then again, the lowering of oxidative stress can help that. Um, the and I think that one of the important things to do here is to go back to having family meals. I talk to so many families and so many children that they don't actually sit down for a family meal. Breakfast is grab whatever on the way out the door to school or no breakfast. Now, guys, if you've ever been in a classroom full of hangry teenagers, then you know what I'm talking about. I used to have a student that every day at 11 o'clock, I could look at the clock and know that she was going to be brought to my office. And it dawned on me one day, she has hypoglycemia. Her blood sugar's dropping so low that that's why she is so awful. So I began to institute something. I already let them drink coffee because coffee is good for ADHD. But I began bringing buckets of peanut butter and very healthy bread and honey. And I would say to the teachers, if they are hungry, they are to go in there to our little food area and make themselves a sandwich. I cannot tell you what that did for classroom behavior. The kids were hungry. And I found out from many of them, because they were driving, that they were using their get something on the way to school money, they were using it to buy gas with. So these kids were so hungry. And you know what you're like when you're hangry? You're hungry and you're angry. Family meals, making sure that they have proper nutrition, making sure that you have family times, making sure you're just not microwaving something and or where they know how to go get a pizza and put it in the microwave. Balanced meals with lots of colorful vegetables. To begin with, they may not eat them, but eventually they'll get curious. And with a few little additives to them, and when I say additives, I'm talking about things like butter or particular healthy sauces and all, they'll begin eating, especially raw vegetables. Adequate amounts of, when I say top protein, I mean healthy meat, cheese, eggs. They can eat as many eggs as they want without growth hormones, herbicides, and pesticides having been fed to these animals. And then I have here vitamin and mineral therapies. When we see that they are deficient in vitamins or minerals, we have to give certain B vitamins, for example. If they are deficient in vitamin B3, we need to give them B3. If they have too much, let's say vitamin B6, we don't need to give them a vitamin B complex. These things have to be given to them individually until they test that they're normal. And this is one of the best ways we can see that the gut has improved. And then you see intentional feeding the brain, what we call nootropics, like L-theanine. The brain appropriates it, uses it for focus, and in the body, it uses it for muscle recovery. But all sorts of good things, but not energy drinks, not these dangerous, dangerous drinks that they give these kids and that some adults are using. And sleep. Now, with sleep, a lot of times these children are notorious for not being able to sleep. I do recommend melatonin because it is a hormone that the body makes. It makes it when you're outside working hard or playing hard. Uh, I can ask you right now, raise your hand if you did that today, and I doubt I'll have a hand. Maybe one or two. So, I usually recommend you start with 1 milligram sublingual or even a half, 0.5 for a child, and then keep working until you hit the right amount. But more importantly, get them in the sunshine, get them playing, get them running, get them trying to build their own melatonin so they can sleep better. Number 8 here is to simply build new mitochondria. And we want that. We are hoping that if in a healthy body, it will build as close to the original DNA if that was healthy. But rebuilding mitochondria, revitalizing mitochondria that has been overexposed to EMFs is so important with these children. And if we've got unhealthy DNA, actually, we know now we can change DNA. 9, family time. Now, I'm recommending that you use your grandparents to babysit if possible. And if only if the grandparents are knowledgeable and cooperative, because I have talked to so many grandparents that just feel that the reason their grandchild has ADHD is because he wasn't beat enough, he wasn't spanked enough. That's incorrect. That's just incorrect. Or they will blame it on poor discipline. Now, poor discipline contributes to poor behavior, but that's not the cause. So if the grandparent is knowledgeable and if the grandparent is cooperative, let the grandparents babysit. That's better than having a young teenager who's going to be on her or his phone and putting them strictly in front of a video or the iPad or something. 10, neurotherapies. This is so important for brain correction and development. And these should be made available to all children in education. Uh, but I don't even recommend you start with neurotherapies like brain directional activities, some of the computerized programs and all that are very effective until the landscape of the body is corrected. Once we get the cells doing what they were designed to do, and once we get the brain where it is not so inflamed, these techniques and therapies work so well. 11, I couldn't end this without referring to spiritual growth. Whole bodies, mind, body, soul, and spirit in these children, they have a strong spiritual component. And sometimes when you can't reach them any other way, you can reach them through worship music and hymns. Music is one of the best uh, cognitive therapies I know of, and I especially recommend the classical music because with neuroscans, they can see what it does to the brain. And I think this is the last one, cognitive behavior and other potential learning therapies. Cognitive behavior can correct bad behavior patterns in the brain. Sometimes the brain is so full of bad behavior that that particular child may need cognitive treatment, cognitive behavior therapies to correct it. So, Julie, let's go to questions and answers. I can't hear you, Julie. Will you unmute?
Sorry about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Jackie, for all that valuable information. And I think that we would all be in agreement with, let's get that book published so that we can all get all the details, because that is just so helpful. And if anyone is interested in any more details of Jackie's protocol, check with the person who invited you on this Zoom, and they should be able to get that to you. So thanks again, Jackie.
Julie, it was a joy and a pleasure.